A mockery of common sense. How a maniac accused of killing 31 elderly women across Russia received a life sentence without ever admitting his guilt. His victims were pensioners in different cities, and his motive was only tiny amounts of money. This is monstrous. 31 murdered pensioners, robberies and thefts in 15 cities of Russia. On March 21, 2024, the Supreme Court of Tatarstan sentenced the Volga region maniac Radik Tagirov to life imprisonment, but he never admitted his guilt, claiming that there are inconsistencies in the case. It just doesn't fit in my head. The first murders. March 2011, Kazan. A 91-year-old pensioner Nasima Ishmertova is standing near a local store. A polite young man approaches her and offers to help her carry heavy bags home. She agrees. Along the way, the new acquaintance complains to the pensioner that he has gotten into a difficult life situation and needs money. Ishmertova believed him. They reached her apartment, put the bags on the floor, and the pensioner decided to help her new acquaintance. The pensioner reached for the money, and at that moment the new acquaintance attacked her. He hit the pensioner in the chin, and she lost consciousness. But the guest did not stop there. He hit Nasima Ishmertova on the head with a blunt object at least 5 times. Then he grabbed the belt from her apron and strangled the woman. That same day, Alsu, her daughter, was unable to reach Nasima. The woman eventually lost her nerve, came to her mother and opened the door with her key. I just couldn't believe it. I was shaking her and saw an apron belt around her neck. I untied it and thought she was going to strangle herself. The phone wasn't working. The cord was pulled out. Ishmertova's daughter Asya said many years later. Then the investigators thought it was a domestic murder. The thing is that the pensioner lent money to her friends at interest. That's how she lived. So suspicion fell first and foremost on her, so to speak, clients. And the investigators among themselves began calling the still unknown killer Raskolnikov. Several months later, in August of that same 2011, the body of an 82-year-old pensioner was found in her own apartment in another area of Kazan. Her head was covered with a pillow, and someone had clearly been at work in the apartment. Literally a few minutes before her death, the pensioner had been talking to her daughter on the phone. At some point, the elderly woman hurried to end the conversation, saying that a social worker had come to see her, and then she was found dead. After several crimes, investigators were able to form a pattern of the serial killer. His victims were lonely pensioners from 60 to 90 years old, who lived mostly in ordinary Khrushchev-era apartments. The security forces believed that the killer had a clear plan of action. He entered the apartments of grandmothers under the guise of a social worker, a gas worker, an electrician, and immediately attacked. The maniac strangled his victims with whatever came to hand: an apron belt, a clothesline, wires. The maniac prudently dealt with the grandmothers in gloves. And after the murder, he scattered household chemicals on the floor. It is noteworthy that the maniac did not rob all the pensioners. Some he simply killed. And sometimes after the crimes, he found only a couple of thousand rubles in the victims' wallets. By the fall of 2011, 7 pensioners had died at the hands of the maniac, and his 8th victim survived. The killer, following the old scheme, made his way into the elderly woman's apartment, attacked her, hit her on the head, and thought he had strangled her. Deciding that his victim was dead, the maniac cleaned out the apartment and disappeared. The pensioner came to her senses and called the police. But due to her poor eyesight, she was unable to help make a composite sketch of the man who attacked her. The only thing the woman remembered was that he was thin, about 175 centimeters tall. Since April 2012, the maniac has been appearing outside Tatarstan. In the neighboring Mariel, in the city of Volsk, the body of a pensioner was found. This time, the killer almost got caught. He entered the elderly woman's apartment using a well-established scheme, attacked the owner of the house, and this time strangled his victim with an iron cord that was at hand. But the maniac did not have time to rob the murdered woman. Her son entered the apartment. He tried to catch the criminal, but then he saw his mother's body and froze. The maniac jumped from the third-floor balcony and escaped. By this time, the most detailed photo fit of the criminal was made. A man from 20 to 35 years old, thin build, height 170 to 175 centimeters, with dark hair and eyes. The police also indicated that he left genetic traces at the crime scene. For information that could help catch the maniac, investigators initially promised 1 million rubles. Then the amount grew to 3 million rubles. After Mariel, brutally murdered and strangled pensioners in their own apartments began to be found in other cities of the country. Izhevsk, Kirov, Cheboksary, Samara, Ufa, Perm, Ivanova, Nizhny Novgorod, Ekaterinburg, Chelyabinsk, Ulyanovsk, Moscow. The murders stopped after a series of attacks on old women in Ufa in September 2012. Then the maniac almost got caught again. Having noticed another victim, an elderly woman with bags, he rushed to her aid. Having got into the woman's apartment, the maniac, as usual, tried to kill the victim. But this time she was not alone. The woman's granddaughter was at home. She scared off the maniac, who went on the run. But he was recorded on CCTV cameras in the entrance that day. The killer himself went into hiding, and investigators continued to search for him for almost 10 years. For 8 years, investigators could not catch the maniac. They detained suspects in this case, but released them. And so time after time. In September 2012, for example, investigators detained a distributor who went door to door and tried to sell a device against all diseases. But after a conversation, he was released. In 2013, the investigation suspected that the criminal was hiding in Sakhalin, but this was a false trail. 3 years later, a video from a surveillance camera of one of the entrances of a house in Kazan appeared on the internet, where the Volga region maniac allegedly got into the frame. But here, too, the investigators came across the wrong guy. In 2017, Pavel Shayakhmatov, a native of Kazakhstan, was caught red-handed in Samara. He was accused of murdering pensioners in Samara and the Smolensk region. After comparing the fingerprints and genetic material, it became clear he was not connected with the series of murders of 2011 to 2012. Nevertheless, they planned to try him for the murders in Samara and the Smolensk region. He did not admit his guilt and committed suicide after the first court hearing. His involvement in all these crimes was not established. Further attempts to find the Volga maniac led to nothing. The only thing the investigators were guided by was that the maniac was either from Tatarstan or from Udmurtia, because he knew these regions well. Arrest of a maniac. On December 1, 2020, investigators and FSB officers detained 38-year-old mechanic Radik Tagirov in Kazan. He was accused of all the murders that took place 8 years ago. During the very first interrogation, he confessed to everything. The Federal Investigative Committee reported on the arrest as follows. The investigation had never been stopped since 2011. They continued to search. And so, at the end of 2020, as a result of painstaking and systematic work, the maniac was found. As the investigative committee added, more than 10,000 comparative genetic examinations were conducted during the investigation. And thus, Tagirov was found. But there is another version, unofficial, from sources in the security forces. Allegedly, a woman contacted the police with a request to find her son, who had not contacted her for many years. She was offered to take a biological test, a scraping from the inside of her cheek. The data was run through the database, and it turned out that the woman's son had a criminal record. Moreover, The results matched the genetic traces that an unknown person left at the murder scenes in 2011 and 2012. At the very first interrogation, Tagirov, as investigators say, told how he killed his victims. He chose pensioners at random. There was no system. Usually he looked for them near markets or stores. He approached those who had bags and offered to help carry them home. He introduced himself as an employee of the management company. He entered the apartment upon invitation, strangled, threw his arm around the back. And that's it. Well, and held until he fell asleep, until he fell, he said during interrogation. He chose strangulation as the method of murder because it's less painful for them. He does not remember how many he killed. He also spoke about the motives for his crimes. I wanted to eat. I was living on the street at the time. It so happened that he took advantage of the opportunity. He wanted to make easy money, Tagirov said during interrogation. Tagirov could not explain why he did not leave his victims alive if he only needed money. At the very first trial in the case on October 26, 2023, Radik Tagirov declared, he is not guilty. Tagirov, who was dubbed the Volga maniac, began to insist that he did not agree with the position of the prosecution and completely denies his involvement in the murder of elderly women. At the same time, none of the victims or witnesses were in the courtroom, and the Volga maniac himself carefully hid his face from the cameras. A couple of days before hearing the verdict, Tagirov made his final statement in court. He continued to insist that he had nothing to do with the murders of pensioners. Moreover, according to Tagirov, there are serious inconsistencies in the case. For example, according to him, he was not even in the city on the dates of the crimes indicated by the investigation, and the material evidence is completely questionable. He asked the court and those gathered not to judge him for crimes he did not commit. I cannot even explain everything that is happening here. I will try not to be rude, but in fact, there was a rape of common sense in the consideration of the criminal case, Tagirov said during his final statement. The court announced the verdict on March 21, 2024. Radik Tagirov was found guilty of murdering 31 people, attempted murder, and 30 robbery episodes. The court gave him a life sentence. Tagirov will spend the first 10 years in prison and the rest of his life in a maximum security penal colony.